Listen-only mode.
Hello New Zealand. How are you all? Thanks for coming today. We're in for a wonderful webinar as usual. Now, Anna-Lee Matthews is my name and I'm here for active management. I am the person that makes the magic happen by pressing the buttons. So before I hand you over to Jean from the PT Council of New Zealand, who will introduce us to our speaker today, just a little bit about active management for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We do lots of amazing things for fitness businesses. We provide resources and ideas and strategies and marketing for personal trainers and fitness businesses. And the very latest thing that we're offering is the new Fitness Business Podcast, which is now live online. So this month, Active Management's CEO, Justin Tamsett, has interviewed Dr. Paul Bedford, who's a retention guru, also spoken with Amanda Vogel, the North American social media guru, and he talks about how to better connect with your clients. This week also, Chantel Broderick interviews the amazing Bill McBride, who's the CEO of Active Sports Clubs from the USA. And the great news is that you will find all the accompanying notes from each show. Every Friday, they'll be online at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. Now, you can subscribe to this podcast simply by going to the link on your screen, or you can search the Fitness Business Podcast on iTunes. So that's a great new resource for all fitness businesses. We also have another event that's coming up. We're super excited to announce that we are running the most unique PT business training program in Australia and New Zealand. It's ideal for PT business owners and PT managers because it will cover things like consumer trends, how to build the ideal customer. You get 3 hours with the sales guru, Steve Jensen, who is amazing. Time with the social media expert from Canada, Amanda Vogel, who I just mentioned before. Building 2 Facebook ads for your business, you'll do that as well. You'll understand how to make your website more engaging, and apparently there is also an extremely very special surprise. You've got to be there to find out what that is though. So we're holding this event in Coogee, which is right by Bondi Beach here in Australia. So there's loads of great cheap accommodation options, and with all the airfare sales that are on at the moment, it's a great excuse for a working getaway. You can find out more by, oh, look at that typo there. I didn't do that, just so you know. You can find moat information on the Active Management website, and the link is there as well. You can email Chantel or head to the website. So I will introduce you. Oh, you're not supposed to see that part. Sorry. I'm having a technological problem here. Oh, here we go. I will hand over to Jean Scott, who's going to introduce you to today's speaker. And just before I do that, if you want to ask any questions of our presenter today, then all you need to do is type your question into the questions box on that GoToWebinar control panel that's on your screen. What happens then is I will pass the questions over to Matt, and he will answer them audibly so everyone can hear the answer. But for right now, let me introduce you over to Jean Scott from the PT Council of New Zealand.
Hi, I'd like to welcome Matt to this webinar this afternoon. I'm fortunate enough to have had listened to Matt in the past and have been very inspired by the magic that he talks. He's going to be speaking to us about exercise motivational change cycle. Matt works as a teacher and a trainer and works with groups and individuals about how to motivate themselves, ultimately the goal being some positive change within their own lives. And I know as a trainer, this is a really cool session that I will be able to use with my clients. So Matt, thank you very much for sharing your session with us. I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Jane, and good to be here and to be doing this webinar today. Just to add to Jane's introduction, the biggest part of what I do, I guess, is working within the criminal justice sector. And a lot of the work I do there is around motivating both offenders and people who work with offenders to try and get the most out of themselves. So I'm really fortunate to be in an industry where there's a huge crossover with my passion, which is, I guess, exercise and health related, the exercise and health industry. So that's really, I'm really fortunate, and I get to borrow a lot of stuff from my 9 to 5, and then I'm able to apply it to this realm, which is really good. So what I'd like to do today is actually just take you through the image that you are hopefully seeing on your screen at the moment. And this is an adapted model of what I'll introduce in a moment as what you may have heard of as the trans-theoretical model of change. So this is my adaptation that specifically applies to exercise and how we make changes around exercise and how we become motivated, and then also how we become unmotivated and how that cycle goes around and around. So what I'll do is I'll just start by giving you a brief history on the model, and then we'll get into looking at each stage. And I mentioned to Annalie earlier that I'm really happy to answer questions along the way, because I want to make this as relevant as possible to those of you that are listening here today. So just to start, I guess, in the late 70s, early 80s, two Rhode Island psychologists, James Prochaska and Carlos Di Clemente, developed, well, they undertook a large piece of research, which was the aim of the research was to establish whether or not there are common steps or stages that people go through when they make a change. So that was the basis for their research. And after a lot of work, and initially around smoking and smoking cessation, they found that there was indeed some really common steps and stages that we all go through in making any change. And thus the trans-theoretical model of change was born. So trans-theoretical just means that basically it borrowed from a lot of the theories, behavior change theories of the time, and to make sort of one unified theory around change. So my adaptation here, the exercise motivation change cycle, is a, like I mentioned earlier, is a version that I've modified slightly to fit with what I believe the cycle is that people go through when they become motivated to exercise and make health-related changes. So I'll go through each of these stages briefly, and after I've done that, I'd like to focus on a few of them in particular, because I think they'll be most relevant to you. So if we start, you'll see that the starting point is the status quo point. Okay, so I guess we can look at this stage as just the way life is. We're often, if you are an exerciser, then the idea that you are exercising and you're looking after your health, that is your status quo. But for a lot of the people we work with, they're actually stuck in a status quo where they're perhaps unhappy with the way they look or the way they feel, and they would actually like to make some changes. But at this point, it's very much just the way life is, and they haven't really got change on their mind. Okay, so what happens what we actually need before we move past this stage is this idea of a trigger event, which brings us to this next stage here. So what a trigger event is it's something that triggers us into thinking about change, or something that tells us all of a sudden that we need to change. Now, unfortunately, these things are often negative, and I'm sure people can relate. Perhaps you've gone and tried some clothes on, and things are a bit too tight, and you kind of thought, man, I didn't know things have got that out of control. Or maybe you've been to the doctor, and the doctor says, look, if you keep going the way you're going, you're going to really struggle to do X, Y, and Z. Or maybe you're struggling to keep up with your friends who are fitter and more healthy. Either way, something happens, and all of a sudden change is on your radar. Now, the good thing about this is that it can be positive. Okay, so you could watch an inspiring movie, or you could listen to a talk or something like that, and you could all of a sudden become, very inspired to do something. And realistically, though, it often is the negative type of trigger that gets us thinking about change. And I'm sure you can relate to this with maybe some of the clients you work with. And I'm wondering what are some of the common things that have got them to come to you, and we might have a talk about that later. So they need to be triggered, and once they're triggered, they jump into this whole idea of thinking about change. So this stage is the stage that often we really skip past, and fortunate, because this is the stage where actually if we spend the most amount of time in, it will actually sustain us for the longest, for a really long time, but we often just skip straight through it. This is the stage where we're thinking about what we want to do. What's really important at this stage is that we grow the importance of the change we wanted to make. Now, what often happens if we skip back to this trigger event, let's say, for example, you got a negative trigger event, say from the doctor, and he said, look, you need to lose X amount of weight, or you're going to be at risk for a heart attack or something. What we often do then, what a negative trigger event often does, is it pushes us straight to this idea of taking action. So we think about change quickly, we make a decision, and we're there. So what we actually miss out on there is all that rich kind of mindfulness or thinking about why this change would actually benefit us, and we're essentially scared into making a change. Now, for those of you guys that know motivation, we'll call this extrinsic motivation. So something that is outside of ourselves that's pushing us to do something, as opposed to an intrinsic motivator, which would be something along the lines of, I really want to do this for myself. We'll get into that a bit more later. So what actually happens with these negative trigger events is we skip these next two stages, which is thinking about change and deciding and preparing, and we launch straight into taking action. And what that means is when things get hard in the taking action stage, which they do, we often don't have, I guess, the mental capacity to hang in there, which is unfortunate. So what we're looking at here, so we've got our trigger event, we're into the thinking about change stage now. Again, most of us skip past this stage, but this is the stage that you can really do some good work in, even retrospectively. This is the stage, again, we build up importance, and we really are thinking about why this change is going to help us in the long term. So assuming what happens after that is we move to this whole deciding and preparing stage. It's just what it sounds like. We either decide to make a change, yes or no, and if we decide not to, then we'd exit here and would come back out and just would be at the status quo stage where we'd be awaiting another trigger event. So often people do get here, and you'll often see this cycle of people going round here, and they kind of live in this area of ambivalence, which is pretty normal. So I'm sure you can all relate in terms of wanting to do something, but you're not quite sure, and you decide, oh, maybe now's not the time. And then something else triggers you, and you get to this point again, you're like, oh yeah, it's still not right. And you just actually live in this area here, okay? There's a nice quote from William Miller, who's the developer of motivational interviewing, if anyone's ever heard of that. And he says, ambivalence is a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there. And certainly within the area I work in mainly, which is criminal justice, a lot of the people we work with do live in this whole idea of in this land of ambivalence. So they want to change, but it's just too hard, so they just keep getting this cycle of around and around, okay? Now what we can actually do to make sure that we can actually make a strong decision to change is actually to sit in this thinking about change stage a bit longer. So we'll come back to this again because I just want to quickly go around here, then we'll talk about some strategies about how we can do this. So assuming we do decide to make a change, we get into this idea of preparing. And again, this is something that people just don't do. Now, I guess for many of us, we just kind of think that once we decide to do something, we'll just do it. Okay, and that's a nice thought, but it's really doesn't really happen like that. You know, sometimes we decide to do something and we go, yep, we're going to do it, and we take action and we end up doing it for ages and it's great. But, you know, that's really the exception. The rule is that we would skip through these stages and we'd end up here and then we'd last for a couple of weeks, then we'd exit and return back again. Okay, so the idea is if we sit in this thinking about change stage a bit more, we can actually, and then prepare a bit more, we can actually take action and end up maintaining it for a long time. So once we have decided and we're prepared or not, we're in this whole taking action stage. Okay, now as I'm sure you'll know as well, this stage can often crash and burn pretty quickly. So part of the preparing is actually thinking about what it's going to take action. It's actually thinking about how hard it's going to be and how I'm going to deal with that. So when we don't do this and we launch straight into this here, we actually find ourselves pretty overwhelmed a lot of the time. So I'm sure you've seen this yourself. How many people would maybe go from doing nothing to saying to themselves, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week, or I'm going to go to the gym even 3 times a week and go for an hour each time. And often it's just too much. But because we don't think about it in here, we're totally overwhelmed when it does come to that point. And as a result, we just end up, you know, basically crashing and burning. And what we do, we exit, and again, we return to the status quo. So what that actually does, if we do this, if we zoom through these stages, we take action, we get overwhelmed, and we return to status quo, it actually really undermines our own self-value and self-worth in terms of someone who can make changes. Because what you actually find is that people get really down and out about the fact that they've quit. So they'll go through this whole thing again. They'll be triggered by something negative and they'll quickly jump into action again without doing these things or these things. And they'll say to themselves, this time it's going to be different. You know, and you've probably said this to yourself too. I know I certainly have. You know, this time I'm just going to do it, or this time it's going to be different. You know what? I'm serious this time. I'm just going to do it. But essentially what people do, they don't do anything different. They just zoom through these stages again, and all of a sudden they're at action. And because they've never really considered this stuff properly, they're in exactly the same spot. They're overwhelmed, they exit, and then they return to the status quo again. And what they've done again is strengthen that idea that I can't start something and stick to it. Okay, so that again, that makes quitting at the action stage even easier, or it makes quitting at the deciding and preparing stage even easier. Now, to put this into perspective, before I look at the maintaining action and the slipping back and back to old ways, let's think of New Year's resolution. Okay, and this is a really classic example of how we can zoom through these stages. So what we've got here, we've got the status quo. So we're partying at New Year's, or whatever you do on New Year's. Last year for me, it was a cup of tea, watching a movie, and going to bed at 11. Pretty lame, but that's what happens when you've got kids, I guess. So I didn't have to go through this, fortunately. But what happens is that we're at status quo. We're doing something. All of a sudden, the countdown begins, right? So that's our trigger event. So the countdown begins, and for whatever reason, we all tend to make New Year's resolutions at New Year's because that's just what you do. So we say to ourselves, that's the trigger event. Our thinking about change stage consists of us saying to ourselves, this year I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm going to start on Monday, because it's always Monday. And then that's it. Okay, so we've basically zoomed through this whole stage here. Now, come Monday, most of us won't even start. Okay, so we've actually already exited here. Or if we do start, it's been such a quick journey to get to this point that, again, we're going to find ourselves overwhelmed. We haven't prepared for it at all. We haven't actually thought about what we're going to need to do to take action. And all of a sudden we're here and we're just thinking, oh man, this is too much. We go back to status quo, and we're probably going to wait till next New Year's before we have another crack at it. But guess what? We're going to probably do exactly the same thing. Okay, so we'll do the whole thing again. The countdown. We'll say, yep, I'm going to start this year. It's going to be different because, you know, for whatever reason, it's going to be different. Then we decide to do it, then we take action, and we're out again. Now, I've actually been doing some great reading, because some really good research lately on willpower. I just mentioned this to Jean earlier, and there's this great, I don't know exactly what she is. I think she's a professor at Harvard, but her name's Kelly McGonigal, and she's written this book called The Willpower Instinct. It's fascinating, and this fits really nicely with this whole concept of saying, you know, this time it's going to be different. Because what she's actually found with her research is that we tend to overestimate our future selves. Okay, so we tend to put our future selves on a pedestal in terms of being someone that is disciplined, they've got self-control, and you know, even though I can't do this now, the me of Monday is going to be able to blitz this training routine. And the reason we overestimate ourselves is because we can't put ourselves in that moment, and we can't actually feel what we're going to feel in that moment. So we tend to overestimate ourselves. So how many times have you guys maybe personally said that, you know, next year or next month or even on Monday, I'm going to do it. I can't do it today because I'm too tired, but come Monday, things are, for whatever reason, are going to be really different, and I'm going to be this super person that's all of a sudden going to take on the world. Then Monday comes, and what do you know, you're actually feeling exactly the same way that you felt when you said you were going to do it, and it's just as difficult. So I guess a bit of a rule there, especially when you're setting goals and you're thinking about change, if it's not something you're prepared to do right now or soon after, then it's probably going to be really unlikely that you're going to be able to do that on Monday or next month or next year. So it's just a wee something there just to the side. So I guess, can I just check in at the moment, Annalie and Jean, if there's any questions at this point before I get to these last stages?
Yep, no, we've got one question, but you might cover it later.
Okay.
So I think keep going, all's well.
Okay, I'll keep going. All right, so this is just, you know, this is the area that most people live in. This whole status quo, something triggers us, we think about change, but not really. We make a snap decision to do it, then we take action, but not. And before you know it, we're back to the status quo, awaiting another trigger. So unfortunately, it's a cycle that most of us live in. So if, however, we do these things right, or if for whatever reason all the stars are aligned and we actually end up taking action for a while, then we might find that we move on to this stage, which is maintaining action. Okay, now just a bit of reference here. This taking action stage, the original research kind of said anything from 3 to 6 months, you kind of needed to be taking action before you would cross over to the stage. Okay, and given what I've seen, given what I know about myself, I would say that's probably about right. I think we really are creatures of habit, and neurons that fire together wire together in terms of how the brain works. So it really does take that 3-month period, I feel, to start bedding in some of these habits before you get to this point where it's actually easier to do something than not do something. So we'd be taking action for about 3 to 6 months before we'd expect to cross over into this maintaining action stage. So what really signifies that we're in this stage is, as I just mentioned it before, it's that feeling that, and you guys will have this yourselves, it's that feeling that if I don't go to the gym or if I don't eat healthy, it's gonna bother me or it's gonna weigh on my mind. Actually going to the gym or eating healthier becomes easier than not doing it. So that's the kind of difference. It's a bit of a tipping point there. So I know for people starting to go to the gym, they could just as easily, or they could very easily not go and it wouldn't bother them. But once you're in this maintaining action stage, you kind of get to that point where if you don't go or if you don't eat healthy or if you don't do the things you've been doing, you kind of don't feel right. And that's all to do with habit formation in the brain, because when we've actually done something for a long amount of time, around that 3 to 6 month mark, we start to go slightly on autopilot. Okay, so we start to do these things that we start to do things pretty much automatically, and it doesn't take as much energy to do them. And all of a sudden, if we don't do them, then our brain is snapped out of that autopilot again, and it actually becomes harder to not do it. If we don't do it, we start to feel a bit funny. Okay, just to put that into perspective, how many people have their rituals in the morning, so say tea or coffee? I bet if you didn't have that tea or coffee, you'd just feel a bit scratchy, something wouldn't be quite right. Perhaps you'd do the same thing at night, you watch a certain show. Perhaps if you missed a session at the gym, you just wouldn't feel right. So that's how we know we're in this maintaining action stage, which is great. So it's just what it sounds like. We've been doing it for a while. And again, for this stage, we're looking at that 3 to 6 month mark before we would exit, having really changed our behavior for some time. Okay, and that's when we get this new status quo. Okay, so if we take action for 3 to 6 months, and if we maintain that action for 3 to 6 months, we would have exited, having really made a long-lasting change, and that will then become our new status quo, which is great. That's what we're trying to achieve here. So that's the idea behind that. Very hard to get to though. Very hard to get to. This maintaining action stage, as I'm sure you know. This is really lifestyle stuff. This is when it becomes embedded into our lifestyle. Now, what we actually find, what often happens here, you'll see this double-sided arrow and into this slipping back stage. What often happens is we start to take our foot off the gas when we get to this stage. So this is one of the biggest mistakes we can do. So we're in the maintaining action stage and we say to ourselves, you know what? I deserve a reward, or you know what? Things have been going so well for so long, I can actually start skipping a few sessions. And if we actually manage to make a change and we exit and that's our new status quo, doing those kinds of things is probably okay. But when we're still working in this maintaining action stage and we're still really trying to bed in that habit, that can be a real slippery slope. Okay, now with the guys I work with offenders, for example, just to put this into perspective before I give a health example, often what we see is guys that have abstained from alcohol for a long time. So their slipping back thing might be that, hey, I haven't seen the boys for a while, so maybe I'll just go and hang out and have one drink. Okay, so you can kind of imagine what happens in that situation. It's very hard to go see the boys and have one drink and not actually go all out. So a lot of us are like that with food too, and if you know anything about sugar and what that does to us, you'll know that maybe one piece of cake will often lead to the whole cake, which will lead to an all-out binge, which will lead to eating crap the next day and the next week, and all of a sudden we've slipped and we're back to old ways. So we've got to be really careful here. The other thing that can actually happen is we can have a wee taste of that old life. So maybe we go hang out with those mates and we see, you know what, this isn't actually for me, I'm going to come right back here. Okay, so I guess the message for people that, especially that are training people that are kind of getting people in this stage, is making sure they don't take their foot off the gas too early, because there's still a lot of, I guess, brain development to really bed in terms of forming that habit. So at this edge, we're still kind of teetering. At this point, we're still kind of teetering on that idea of it's just as easy to not do it than it is to do it. You know, we're on that edge, and we want to just keep going for a bit longer so it becomes much easier to do it. That's what we're wanting to do there. And like I said, if we do that for 3 to 6 months, we exit, and then we're back. We've developed this new status quo, which is great because then those habits are really bedded in, and it's going to actually take probably an effort to not do what we wanted to do. But alas, what usually happens is that, you know, again, it's the exception that we're here, something triggers us, we think about it, we decide, we take action, we maintain, then we change for good. You know, that's the exception. The rule is we'd usually slip. And indeed, the initial kind of research on this around smoking cessation found that people went around this circle 7.5 times on average before they actually made a long-lasting change in terms of smoking. So I'm not sure if there's any smokers in the group or if you know anyone that has tried to quit smoking, but that's about right. You know, 7.5 times, and depending on what the thing is you're trying to change, that can often be about right too. And I'm sure, you know, with some of the people you may work with, you may have had them start with you, then quit, then start with you and quit several times before that habit's finally stuck. So either way, we're slipping back, and this stage is about, we're not quite back to the way we were. We're just dabbling, okay? We're kind of dabbling. So it might be skipping the odd workout. It might be having the odd cheat meal that start to get a bit more calorically, you know, that we're starting to eat a bit more crap and a bit more regularly, and slowly we're starting to slip. So this is the stage where we've got to be really conscious in terms of the people we're working with, because we want to drag them back to the stage. However, you know, if we let that go, basically we're going to find that we're back to old ways, okay? And that's back to the way we were right at the start. What makes this different, I guess, than the status quo stage, because this is essentially where we started, is that we've had this understanding of having tried and not succeeded. But unlike exiting it, taking action, it's actually a lot better to come all the way around, because we've actually tasted that success, and we would have actually been making changes for at least 6 months before we get back to here. So the secret with this stage, I guess, is to focus on the positive aspects of that journey, of that specific change journey. And even though we are back to old ways, you know, we had to acknowledge all these good things that we did do as we went around. So that's the change cycle in a nutshell. I guess I just wanted to, at this point, go over a couple of areas within the cycle that I think we can really do some good. But just before we do that, are there any questions about the cycle and any confusion or anything you want answered before I go on to those points of interest?
Not so far, but I will interrupt you if they do come through.
Okay, I hope I'm not talking too fast. I'm kind of trying to squeeze a lot in. Okay,
so
that's the cycle. And look, I'm hoping you can relate this to the changes you've made as well. Okay, often, you know, we can pretty much relate this to every change we ever make, really. The unfortunate bit about the changes we make is, like I said right at the start, we often zoom, and we get to this point, we get overwhelmed, and then we come back here. So we kind of live in this bottom half of the circle. So what can you do? I guess what can you do as trainers and health professionals that is going to make people's chances of getting to this point here and exiting, having made a change, what's going to make that stick a bit? So I guess the first thing is the trigger event. So you'll get a lot of people that have had a negative trigger that are coming to you because of that trigger, and they'll be here. They'll be coming to you in the taking action stage, because of course that's action in itself. They would have had a trigger, they would have thought about it quickly, they would have decided that they're doing it, and here they are. So what we can do while we're actually starting whatever it is we do with that person, we can actually retrospectively try and create another trigger that's a bit more intrinsic. So we can start asking questions. If they're there because of the doctor, yes, that's fine. Or if they're there because they didn't like the way they looked, or you know, something negative, we can try to flip that into a positive. So just through our conversations with them, we can start having conversations about, you know, for example, what's going to be good about you reaching your goal. You know, what's going to change in your life? How might life be better if you reach your goal? Those kinds of questions, and we just want to, you know, we don't want to sit them down and grill them, but this is just all in the conversation we have with them. So we want to try and flip that trigger from a negative to a positive. So all of a sudden they start to believe that they're doing this for a reason that they've created, not for a reason that's been imposed on them. So that's the first thing, you know, we want to flip that negative to a positive. Then we want to retrospectively, I guess, think about this idea of change. So again, why is this making this change so important to you? And if people say, oh, because the doctor told me to, or something like that, we want to go, okay, yep, we want to accept that. We don't want to discount that, because that's the reason that may have come in the first place. But we want to try and flip it. Okay, so we might accept that. We might ask them, okay, what are the other benefits here? How might this help you in the future? How might it help you do whatever you do in your day-to-day life? If the people have got kids and family, that's always a really good thing to do too. So we can actually start asking them how it might benefit our children. So how might a fitter, healthier you benefit your children in the long run? We can actually get quite emotive here without getting too serious, you know. So if you're able to play with your kids all the time, and if you're able to spend more time with your kids, how do you think they'd feel about it? You know, how do you think they would look at you differently? How do you think they would look at you when you walked into school, and you were the fit mum, you know, and you saw these other parents around that weren't, or whatever, you know, so we can actually start, and then what that does is develops really intrinsic motivation to change. Okay, so all of a sudden we want it for ourselves, because we can see why this is going to really improve our lives, and how it's also going to improve the lives of other people we care about. That's a big one. And I have to just say this here, it's especially, it's much more effective for females as well, because especially the ties they have with others, that's an area we can really start working a bit more with females. That whole idea of how is what we're going to do, you know, how's that going to affect others positively? Hope I'm not running out of time here, just butt in if I am. And the deciding and preparing stage, this is actually one of the key stages too. People don't think about how hard this stuff is. Okay, so we can actually prepare them. We can play this great game called the what if game, you know, and you might play this in any capacity, but basically we ask a whole lot of what if questions. What if you get home and you're tired and you've got a gym session? You know, what are you going to do? And if people say something like, well, I'm just going to do it, you know, that's a big wrong answer. Not that you're going to say that, but we want to again link that to these reasons why. Okay, so what you could say is, well, look, one thing you could do is actually remember why you want to do this in the first place. Okay, things like that. So we really want to prepare them for how hard it's going to be, because it will be hard. Okay, and people don't think about how hard it's going to be, and that's why they crash and burn here. We might prepare them for the fact that, hey, look, your motivation in a couple of weeks is probably going to run out. And how you say this is going to be up to them. Some people like it straight up and some people like it sugar-coated, but essentially what we get when we first start something is this motivational honeymoon period, and it will run out in probably quite a short time too. You're going to get to a point where you can't be bothered, and that initial excitement of going to the gym or eating healthy is going to wear right off, and your brain it's going to almost force you back to doing what you wanted to do, what you did before. It's actually called, there's a term for this too, it's called the extinction burst. Just as you start to think things are easy and they're going really well, your brain is going to make this last-ditch effort to cling on to those old habits, because the brain wants the least path of resistance. It's a lazy brain, okay? Evolutionarily, it makes sense that our brain takes the path of least resistance, okay? Times were tough back in the day. They're not so tough now, but we're still kind of left with the dregs of evolution in terms of wanting to do the easiest thing. Okay, so our brain's going to make a last-ditch effort. So we want to prepare people for that. So we want to kind of let them down softly and sort of let them know that things will get tough. So what are your strategies for that time? You know, so if you still want to do this, then you really need to think about how you're going to deal with that moment, because it will come. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So just preparing them for those harsh realities without being too harsh and bringing them down is really important too. So look, I guess at this stage, I could prattle on forever, but I guess I'll open it up if there's any questions at this point, because I know we're sort of probably running out of time.
We probably are near the end, Matt.
Yeah, so if there's anything there.
Questions. Yes.
Yep.
So one question is, can we refer clients to you to do a consultation?
Yeah, sure. That's fine. You just get hold of me through my website. Yeah.
What's your website?
Exercisechange.co.nz.
Wonderful.
I should have had
also,
it up.
that's okay. And also, do you have any resources that trainers can get from you?
Yeah, sure. I've actually got, if you just actually sign up to my website, you can get my whole kind of 70-page resource book. So that'll just come to you, and that's just got, it's actually too much information. So sorry in advance when you receive it, because you're just going to probably be a bit overwhelmed. But there's things you can use for each and every stage here. Mainly we're talking questions in terms of resources, but things like that what if game and a whole lot of other bits and pieces there. So if you sign up there, you'll get that free resource book, and that's
Tell
something
us
you
that
can
address
check
again.
out. Exercisechange.co.nz.
Exercisechange.co.nz.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And then,
Look,
yeah.
that's fantastic, Matt. Did you have anything else that you'd like to share with everyone today?
Not really. There was, I guess, in terms of consultations, referring people to me for consultations, that's absolutely fine. But what I actually like to do, the way I like to work more is to probably train the people that are working with the people, if you know what I mean. Like, I'm happy to work with individuals, but yeah, that's probably more of a strength. So just let people know that.
Wonderful.
But otherwise,
they can be
thanks.
in touch with you through your site.
Yeah, that's good. And otherwise, thanks for being a captive audience. You weren't too loud, which was great. And yeah, so it was good for my first one.
You
Thank you.
did a great job, great job. So thank you, Matt. Let me press a little button here before we end the webinar. At Active Management, we do like to challenge everyone after each of our webinars with what we call our JDI challenge. That would be the Just Do It challenge, but somebody else has got that slogan. So what we want to do is we want to put the challenge to you to say, what will you do in the next day or within the next 10 days and the next 20 and the next 30? What will you do with the information that you've heard today? Listening's one thing, but implementing is a whole nother game. So it's harder, we understand that. So if you've got a pen and paper nearby or a keyboard, take a few minutes to just write down what immediately pops into your head to do and the deadline in which you will have ticked that off your list, because we think that it's great to listen to the webinars, but to actually apply the information that you learn is even better. So take a few moments to do that. I do have a question that's come through for you, Matt, in the meantime.
Sure. Yep.
Ruth has asked, what happens when someone else sabotages the change cycle?
So we're talking about, say, a person, so if someone's trying to make a change, someone they know tries to sabotage it, or they sabotage themselves.
A friend.
The friend.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Right. Excellent. So that's what we actually want to do, and that's part of the deciding and preparing stage. So in the preparation stage, we want to talk about, what's going to happen when your friend tries to get you to go out on the terps or something, because it's interesting, that whole idea of people trying to sabotage you. It's actually not about you, it's about them feeling crap about themselves. So, you might have a friend that doesn't want you to get healthy because she's very happy, or he's very happy with the way things are with you two. You go out every weekend, you get on the terps or whatever, and that's great. So that sabotage is actually about them. So when people try to make you feel guilty, it's not about you, it's about what that person wants. So if we kind of frame it like that, and then we can kind of say, so if you go out with this person, you're giving them what they want, and you're sacrificing what you want. Okay, now if you've actually thought about change and thought about all these reasons change is important to you, all of a sudden your friend wanting to go out with you because they miss you and they don't, or they feel bad about themselves, doesn't make you feel as guilty, if you know what I mean. So I hope that helps. But really what we've got to do in that situation is prepare for it, because emotions are a funny thing and they make us react in funny ways. But if we actually, it's actually very empowering if we predict a situation and then it comes up and it's like, oh yeah, I thought about this and here's my strategy, boom. So it's just about preparing and actually being ready for when those things happen.
Fantastic. Awesome, Matt. Look, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, especially if you're on holidays at the moment. So thanks so much for joining us. We really have benefited from your wisdom. I can speak on behalf of myself and on everybody else, I'm sure, feels the same. So, hey, thanks so much for spending that time with us. To everybody who attended, thank you as well. And we will see you next time, and I will now shut down our webinar. Have a great day,
Great.
everyone. Thanks again, Matt.
Thanks. Bye.